Have you ever felt completely safe in your own home? I used to. I bought a small house backing onto a beautiful, quiet forest. It was my dream, my little sanctuary away from the world. But that dream became a nightmare when I realized someone was using those woods not to hike, but to watch me. And what I found on my porch proved he wanted to do more than just watch. My name is Chloe, and this happened about 2 years ago, but it feels like it was just last night. After saving up for years, I finally bought my first home in a quiet suburban town in the Pacific Northwest. The best part, for me, was the backyard. It wasn't huge, but it opened directly into a dense, dark stretch of woods owned by the state. No neighbors behind me, just trees. It felt private and serene. I'd sit on my back porch with my coffee in the morning and watch deer wander out from the tree line. It was perfect. I work from home as a graphic designer, so I spend a lot of time by myself. I'm an introvert, so the solitude was a feature, not a bug. The house became my whole world, a place where I felt totally in control and secure. The first couple of months were blissful. I settled into a comfortable routine. Work during the day, maybe some gardening in the evening, and then I'd relax on the porch as the sun went down, listening to the sounds of the forest. Then, the little things started. The first anomaly was a broken twig on my porch railing. It was snapped clean in half. I figured an animal, maybe a big raccoon, had climbed up. I swept it off and didn't think twice. A week later, I found a small pile of stones, about 5 of them stacked neatly on the corner of my welcome mat. They weren't there when I went to bed. It was odd, a little childish, like something a kid would do. I brushed them into the garden and tried to forget it. But the feeling of being completely alone in my sanctuary started to fade. It was a gradual shift. I'd be working at my desk, which faced a large window looking out at the yard and the woods, and I'd get that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, that feeling that you're being watched. I'd scan the tree line, but I never saw anything other than swaying branches and shadows. Then, one afternoon, I saw him. I was washing dishes, glancing out the kitchen window. At the very edge of the woods, where the deep shade met the sunlit grass of my lawn, a man was standing there. He was just a figure, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. He was too far away to see his face clearly. He was just standing perfectly still, looking toward my house. My heart did a little jump, but my logical brain kicked in. He's probably a hiker. Maybe he's lost or just taking a break. I watched him for a minute, and then he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing completely.
It was unsettling, but explainable, or so I told myself. But then I saw him again a few days later. Same spot, same dark jacket, same stillness. He wasn't hiking, he was observing. He stood there for maybe 10 minutes, a statue at the edge of my property, before melting back into the trees. This became his routine. Every 2 or 3 days, he'd be there. He never did anything threatening, he just watched. The normalcy of my life was being poisoned by this quiet, persistent presence. I stopped sitting on my porch in the evenings. I started drawing my curtains earlier. My safe space was shrinking. One Saturday, I was determined to take my yard back. I put on some music and started doing some weeding. I was trying to ignore the woods, to pretend he wasn't there, but I couldn't. I kept glancing up, and then I saw him. He was closer this time, not on my lawn, but just a few feet inside the tree line, partially hidden behind a large fir tree. I could see him more clearly now. He was middle-aged, thin, with a gaunt face. He wasn't looking at the house in general. He was looking directly at me. I dropped my trowel, my hands shaking. I stood up and stared back, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. He didn't move. He didn't wave or call out. He just stared with this completely blank, empty expression. I grabbed my things and practically ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, but I could hear the skepticism in the officer's voice. "So, he's just standing there, ma'am? On public land?" He said they'd send a car to patrol the area, but I knew it was useless. The man would be gone long before they arrived. And he was. That was the turning point. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I knew this was deliberate. He was targeting me. The next week was a blur of anxiety. I bought new locks for my doors and windows. I installed a motion sensor floodlight for the backyard. Every creak of the house made me jump. I barely slept. I kept the curtains closed at all times, living in a self-imposed twilight. Then came the night that broke me. I was asleep, and I was woken up by a sound. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I lay frozen in bed, listening. It was coming from the back of the house, from my living room. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I slowly, quietly got out of bed and crept down the hallway. The tapping was coming from the large sliding glass door that led to the porch. I peered around the corner. The motion sensor light was on, flooding the porch in harsh white light. And there he was. He was standing on my porch, inches from the glass. His face was pressed close, and he was tapping on the window with one long, bony finger. When he saw me, he didn't run. He smiled. It was the most horrifying smile I've ever seen. It was wide, unnatural, and completely devoid of warmth. It was a predator's smile. I screamed and scrambled backward, grabbing my phone. I fumbled with the screen, my fingers slick with sweat, and dialed 911. As I was hysterically trying to explain what was happening to the dispatcher, I watched him. He stopped tapping. He calmly took a step back and reached for the handle of the sliding door. He jiggled it, slowly, deliberately, testing it. He knew I was watching. He wanted me to see. I was sobbing into the phone, telling the dispatcher he was trying to get in. He gave the handle one last pull, then turned and looked right at me, still smiling. He gave a little nod, as if to say, "Next time." Then, he stepped off the porch and vanished into the dark beyond the floodlight's reach. The police arrived in what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. They swept the yard and the woods with their flashlights, but he was gone. They found his footprints all over my garden beds and on the porch, but that wasn't the worst of it. On the small table next to my porch swing, where I used to leave my book and a hairbrush, they found what he'd left behind. It was a small, crude doll, made of twigs and twine, but the hair on its head was real. It was long and brown. It was my hair, taken from the brush I'd carelessly left outside. I didn't stay another night. I packed a bag while the police were there and went to a hotel. The next day, my dad came and helped me pack up my entire life. We put the house on the market, and I sold it at a loss. I didn't care. I just had to get away. I live in a high-rise apartment in the city now. I'm on the 15th floor. There are no woods, no quiet backyards, but I still feel his eyes on me sometimes. When I walk down the street, I find myself scanning the faces in the crowd. There's a park across from my building, and sometimes I look down and see a man standing by the trees, and my blood runs cold, even when I know it's not him. I don't know who he was
or what he ultimately wanted. But I know he took more than just my sense of security. He took my home, and that's a kind of haunting that never really leaves you.
I work the night shift at a sleep clinic. It's my job to watch people sleep, to monitor their brain waves and heart rates, looking for abnormalities. But one night, I realized one of my patients wasn't sleeping at all. In fact, he was wide awake. He was watching me back. And I soon learned he wasn't there for a medical study. He was there for me. My name is Leo, and for about 3 years, I was an overnight polysomnographic technologist. That's a fancy way of saying I was the guy who stayed up all night at a sleep lab. The clinic was located in one of those quiet, sprawling suburban medical parks in Ohio. At night, the whole area was a ghost town, just empty parking lots and dark office buildings. My building was the only one with lights on. My job was pretty straightforward and honestly kinda eerie even on a good night. Patients would arrive in the evening. I'd get them settled into their private rooms, which were basically just sterile-looking hotel rooms. Then I'd spend about 30 minutes hooking them up to a web of wires and electrodes on their scalp, their face, their chest. Once they were tucked in, I'd retreat to my control room. It was a central hub with a huge bank of monitors displaying each patient's vitals in real time. My job was to sit there in the dark, drink bad coffee, and make sure nobody stopped breathing in their sleep. After 10 p.m., the main doors were locked. The only way in or out was with a key card. It was just me and usually 2 or 3 patients sealed inside this quiet, climate-controlled building until morning. I got used to the silence, the rhythmic beeping of the machines, the strange intimacy of watching strangers in their most vulnerable state. It was a weird job, but it was predictable. Until the night I met the man in room 3B. He checked in around 9 p.m. He looked to be in his mid-40s, average height, average build, dressed in simple gray sweatpants and a t-shirt. He had a calm, almost placid demeanor. He filled out his paperwork neatly. His name was listed as John Smith, a detail that I should have found suspicious, but in the medical field, you see it all the time. He told me his doctor referred him for suspected severe insomnia. As I was hooking up the electrodes, he was different from other patients. Most people are either nervous or tired and cranky. He was neither. He was observant. He asked questions, but they weren't about the procedure. "How many techs work overnight?" he asked, his voice even. "Just me," I replied, taping a sensor to his temple. "Must get quiet," he mused. "Is there any other security?" His eyes, which were a very pale blue, didn't seem to blink much. I gave him some vague, reassuring answer about the locked doors and moved on. I chalked it up to anxiety about the study. Some people get weirded out by the process. I finished up, said my usual, try to relax and get some sleep, and went back to my control room. The first couple of hours of the shift were normal. My other 2 patients, an elderly woman in 3A and a younger guy in 3C, were both fast asleep, their brainwaves showing typical sleep patterns. But John Smith in 3B was an anomaly. His vitals were calm, a low, steady heart rate, but his brainwave monitor was showing pure alpha waves. He was completely, calmly awake. I switched to the infrared camera feed for his room. The low-light image was grainy but clear enough. He was lying perfectly still on his back, hands folded on his chest, but his eyes were wide open. He wasn't looking around the room or at the ceiling. He was staring directly at the small black dome of the camera mounted in the corner. It was unnerving. It felt less like I was monitoring a patient and more like we were in a staring contest. For over an hour, he didn't move a muscle, just that unwavering stare. My unease grew into a knot in my stomach. This wasn't insomnia. This was something else. This was intentional. Around 1 a.m., I saw him move. It was a tiny, deliberate motion. He slowly raised one hand and, with surgical precision, peeled one of the EEG electrodes from his forehead. He placed it silently on the nightstand. A few minutes later, he removed another one. The corresponding signals on my monitor flatlined. He was disconnecting himself, one wire at a time, so slowly and carefully that it triggered no alarms. My training protocol for this was clear. If a patient is removing leads, you go in and check on them. But every instinct in my body was screaming not to. The questions he'd asked earlier echoed in my head. How many techs work overnight? Just me. Any other security? Just the locked doors. My heart was hammering, but I had to follow the rules. I couldn't just sit there. I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked down the short, dimly lit hallway to room 3B. I knocked softly on the door. Mr. Smith? Everything okay in there? Silence. Not a sound from inside. I knocked again, a little louder. John, it's Leo from the front desk. I need to come in and check your leads. Still nothing. My hand was trembling as I slid my keycard into the slot. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door open just a crack and peered into the darkness. Mr. Smith, I whispered. The room was silent. I could just make out the shape of the bed, and it was empty. The sheets were thrown back. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, the door was slammed shut from inside the room. I was plunged into darkness with it. I gasped and spun around, and he was there, a dark silhouette standing between me and the door. The only light was the faint green glow from the smoke detector on the ceiling, and it caught the glint in his pale eyes.
He wasn't breathing heavily. He wasn't angry. He was completely calm. I knew you would come, he said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. I wanted to see how long it would take for you to notice. My mind was blank with terror. I couldn't even form a word. You're very observant, Leo, he continued, taking a slow step toward me. That's a good quality. He reached into the duffel bag he'd brought, which was sitting on the floor by his feet. I didn't fake the insomnia, you know. I don't sleep. It gives me more time to plan. He pulled out a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties. That's what broke the spell. Adrenaline flooded my system. I didn't think, I just reacted. I shoved him hard with everything I had. He was surprisingly solid, but it caught him off balance. He stumbled back, and in that split second, I lunged for the door handle. I threw it open and sprinted down the hall back to the control room, not daring to look back. I slammed the heavy office door shut and hit the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grab the phone. I hit the panic button under the desk, which sent a silent alarm directly to the local police department. I looked up at the monitors. The camera in the hallway showed him. He wasn't running after me. He was just walking out of room 3B, slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. He stopped in the middle of the hall and looked directly into the hallway camera. He raised a hand and gave a slow, casual wave. Then he turned and walked towards the main entrance of the clinic. I watched, breathless, as he pulled on the locked glass doors. They didn't budge. He seemed unsurprised. He turned and calmly walked down another corridor, out of the camera's view. A few seconds later, I heard the faint but distinct crash of the emergency fire exit being thrown open, followed by the blare of its alarm. By the time I could hear sirens approaching outside, he was long gone into the empty night of the office park. When the police arrived, they found nothing. The file he'd given me was full of fake information, the name, the address, the referring doctor, all fabricated. They had no idea who he was. They never found him. I quit that job a week later. I can't be in quiet buildings at night anymore. I still have nightmares about it.
I think about his calmness, his patience, the way he planned every single step. And the question that haunts me, the one I know I'll never have an answer to, is what was his plan for me once those zip ties were on?
For 3 weeks, the same man was on my train platform every night. He never got on my train. He just watched it leave. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just seeing things in a big city. Then one night, he broke his pattern. He got on the train, sat across from me in an empty car, and showed me a picture he'd taken of my own front door. My name is Sarah, and I used to be a creature of habit. For 2 years, I worked as a paralegal at a big law firm in downtown Chicago. The hours were brutal. I rarely left the office before 10 p.m. My commute home was always the same. A brisk 10-minute walk to the L station, then the Brown Line train 40 minutes out to my quiet residential neighborhood. Taking the train that late at night, you get used to a certain atmosphere. It's not crowded. The people you see are regulars, other late shift workers, tired students, people coming home from a night out. There was a weird sense of community in our shared exhaustion. It felt routine, and because it was routine, it felt safe. That sense of safety started to unravel because of him. The first time I noticed him, I didn't think anything of it. He was just a man standing on the platform, probably in his late 30s, nondescript. He wore a plain gray coat and a dark baseball cap pulled down low, obscuring most of his face. He was just another tired commuter waiting for his train. My train arrived, I got on, found my usual seat, and didn't give him a second thought. But the next night, he was there again. Same spot, at the far end of the platform, away from the main cluster of people. And the night after that, and the night after that. It became a strange, one-sided landmark in my nightly journey. There was the hot dog stand on the corner, the flickering fluorescent light in the tunnel, and the man in the gray coat at the end of the platform. The first weird detail I noticed was that he never seemed to get on the train. I'd watch as I pulled away from the station, and he'd still be standing there, watching the train go. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe his train came right after mine. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But every single night? For a week straight? My logical explanations started to feel thin. I began to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach every time I walked down the stairs to the platform. I'd scan the crowd, and my breath would catch until I saw him. And he was always there. He never did anything overtly strange. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't pace. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, with a stillness that was deeply unsettling. I started to feel his presence was connected to me. It felt like he was there for me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. A classic case of a woman in a city being overly paranoid. I tried to ignore him. I'd put in my earbuds and stare at my phone, pretending he didn't exist.
Then he changed the pattern. One night, about 2 weeks in, I got on the train and took my seat. As the doors were about to chime shut, he stepped into my car. My heart leaped into my throat. He didn't look at me. He just walked to the opposite end of the car and stood by the doors, his back to me. I watched his reflection in the dark window. He just stood there, motionless, as the train rumbled through the city. I was on high alert the entire ride, my knuckles white from gripping my purse. My stop was approaching. I got ready to get off, my body tense. He got off one stop before mine. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so intense it made me dizzy. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe he lived one stop away. But he did it again the next night, and the night after. He'd wait on the platform, get into my car at the last second, ride to the stop before mine, and get off. He was closing the distance. He was mapping my routine. The paranoia was no longer a feeling, it was a certainty. He was following me.
I started taking different cars, sitting in different seats. It didn't matter. He'd always find a way to be in the same car, always maintaining that distance, always getting off one stop early. I reported it to the transit authority. I described the man, his coat, his hat. They were sympathetic, but told me that without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. "He has a right to ride the train, miss," one officer told me, not unkindly. I felt helpless and stupid. I started taking cabs home, which I couldn't afford, or leaving work with a coworker. But on the nights I couldn't, the dread would return. Then came the night of the confrontation. It was a Thursday. A nasty winter storm had hit the city, and the train service was a mess. By the time I got to the station, it was nearly midnight, and the platform was almost deserted. He was there, of course, standing in his usual spot. The train finally arrived, and when I got on, I realized the car was completely empty. It was just me. As the doors were closing, he stepped on. My stomach plummeted. He didn't go to the other end of the car this time. He just stood by the door for a moment, and then the train lurched forward and stopped. The lights flickered and went out, replaced by dim orange emergency lighting. An automated voice announced we were being held between stations due to a signal malfunction. We were trapped in a metal tube in the dark under the city, and I was alone with him. He turned, and for the first time, he started walking towards me. His steps were slow and even, echoing in the silent car. I was frozen to my seat. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. He stopped at the seats directly across the aisle from me and sat down. He finally took off his baseball cap. His face was pale, his eyes dark and empty. He looked at me and smiled, a thin, lipless smile.
"Quiet tonight, isn't it?" he said. His voice was soft, raspy. I was hoping it would be. I just stared at him, my mind screaming. He reached into the inside pocket of his gray coat. I flinched, thinking he was pulling out a weapon, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a photograph, a standard 4x6 print. He held it out for me to see. My blood turned to ice. It was a picture of my apartment building. More specifically, it was a picture of my front door. It was a close-up shot, taken at night. I could see the scuffed green paint, the brass numbers of my unit, and the seasonal wreath I had just hung up a week ago. "I like your wreath," he said, his voice calm, conversational, very festive. At that exact moment, the main lights in the train car flickered back on with a loud buzz, and the train lurched forward with a deafening screech of metal. The sudden noise and light broke my paralysis. The train was pulling into the next station. As soon as the doors hissed open, I was out of my seat and sprinting. I didn't even care that it wasn't my stop. I ran off the train, up the stairs, and out into the biting wind and snow. I didn't look back. I just ran until my lungs burned. I never went back to my apartment. I called my friend, sobbing, and she came and picked me up. The next day, I went with my brother to get my things. I broke my lease. I quit my job. I left Chicago a month later. The transit police looked at the security footage. They saw him following me for weeks. They saw him get in the car with me that night, but his face was too blurry and he paid for his fare in cash. They never identified him. I live in a different city now, in a different state. I have a car. I don't take public transportation, but sometimes when I'm stopped at a red light, I'll see a man in a gray coat on the sidewalk, and for a terrifying second, I'm right back in that empty train car, staring at a picture of my front door, and realizing that my anonymous city life was never anonymous after all.